In the year 452 AD, the most powerful city in the Western world, the city that had ruled half the known earth for 5 centuries, sent its most important man to beg. Not to negotiate, not to discuss terms, to beg. Pope Leo I rode out personally to meet a man camped on the Italian plains. A man who had already burned 17 cities to the ground in the previous 18 months. A man whose name, when spoken, caused Roman soldiers to desert their posts without orders. His name was Attila, and Hollywood has spent decades turning him into a cartoon villain, a savage with a sword and nothing more. But the real Attila the Hun was something far more disturbing. He wasn't a mindless destroyer. He was calculating, strategic, brilliant, and what he did to the people who crossed him, the documented, historically verified things, make every Hollywood version look like a children's story. This is the Attila they don't want you to know. To understand why Attila became what he became, you need to understand what the Huns were and what they were not. The Roman world first encountered the Huns in the late 300s AD, and the reaction was unlike anything Rome had seen in centuries. Historian Ammianus Marcellinus, a soldier and eyewitness, wrote descriptions of these people that read less like military reports and more like dispatches from a nightmare. He described warriors who could ride from birth, who slept on their horses, who ate raw meat softened under their saddles, who looked so different from anything in the Roman world that some Romans genuinely believed they were not fully human. Half man, half demon, born of witches and evil spirits in the frozen north. That was propaganda, of course. But it tells you something critical. The Huns terrified Rome at a primal level that no enemy had managed since Hannibal crossed the Alps 600 years earlier. The Huns swept into the Gothic territories north of the Danube in the 370s. What happened next set the entire Roman world on a path toward collapse. Gothic tribes, the Visigoths, the Ostrogoths, fled in absolute terror across the Roman border. Not invaded, fled. They literally begged Roman Emperor Valens to let them in, to give them land inside the empire, anything to put a river between them and the Huns. Valens agreed, and that decision eventually cost him his life at the Battle of Adrianople in 378 AD, one of Rome's worst military disasters ever, when those same Goths, mistreated by corrupt Roman officials, turned on their hosts. The Huns had barely done anything yet, and they'd already broken Rome. Attila was born into this world around 406 AD. His uncle Rugila was king of a Hunnic confederation that was growing into an empire. And from the beginning, Attila was marked for greatness and for something darker. As a child, he was sent to the Roman court as a diplomatic hostage. This was standard practice: exchange noble children to guarantee peace treaties. The Romans sent a boy named Flavius Aetius to the Huns. Attila came to Rome. Think about what that means. The man who would later destroy Roman cities, slaughter Roman populations, and make Roman emperors kneel, grew up inside Rome. He spoke Latin. He understood Roman politics, Roman military strategy, Roman weakness, Roman corruption. He used every single piece of that knowledge against them. When Rugila died around 434 AD, power passed to his nephews, Attila and his older brother Bleda. For 11 years, they ruled jointly. 2 kings, 1 empire. In 445 AD, Bleda died. The historical sources are careful with their words here. They say Bleda died. Some say he died by some chance. Priscus of Panium, the one eyewitness historian we have for Attila's court, doesn't give details. But here's what we know. After Bleda's death, there were no more joint rulers. There was only Attila. Every decision, every campaign, every execution, Attila alone. And the campaigns that followed Bleda's death were dramatically more brutal, more ambitious, and more effective than anything before. Ancient sources, including Jordan's writing in the 6th century, simply state that Attila killed Bleda. Fratricide, brother killing, was not uncommon among steppe rulers. Power demanded it. The man who would threaten to destroy Rome murdered his own brother to get there. With sole command secured, Attila rebuilt the Hunnic military into something the ancient world had never seen. The Huns were already the finest mounted archers in existence. Attila added siege technology, either captured from the Romans or operated by Roman engineers he'd taken prisoner. He could now attack cities that previous Hunnic armies couldn't touch. He also had an intelligence network, spies in Roman courts, informants in military units. Attila knew troop movements before Roman generals did. He knew which generals were corrupt. He knew which officials could be bribed. He knew where Roman defenses were weakest. He also had something that made Roman negotiators physically uncomfortable: a claim of divine destiny. Around 441 AD, a Hunnic shepherd found an ancient sword buried in a field. He brought it to Attila. Attila declared it the sword of Mars, a divine weapon that had belonged to the god of war himself, now delivered to Attila as a sign from the heavens that he was destined to conquer the world. Whether Attila believed this or used it as propaganda doesn't matter. His soldiers believed it. His enemies heard about it. And from that point forward, Attila carried the psychological weight of invincibility wherever he rode. Most people know Attila for threatening Rome in the West. But before he ever turned toward Italy, he spent a decade systematically dismantling the Eastern Roman Empire, and what he did there is almost never discussed. Between 441 and 447 AD, Attila launched multiple major campaigns into the Balkans, the heartland of the Eastern Empire. What he did to those cities is documented in detail by Priscus and other Byzantine sources. The city of Nisus, modern-day Anias in Serbia, birthplace of Emperor Constantine himself, was destroyed so completely that when a Roman diplomatic mission passed through the area years later, they couldn't find a place to camp on the riverbank, because the banks were still covered in human bones. Read that again. Years later, still covered in bones. Priscus writes that Attila's forces used Roman siege techniques, battering rams, siege towers, hooks on ropes to pull defenders off walls, but what followed the breaching of walls was unlike anything in standard Roman warfare. Cities weren't just sacked, they were erased. 17 cities are listed by name in the sources as destroyed during these campaigns. The historian Callinicus describes Attila's army as a force that covered the land like a cloud of locusts, and unlike most ancient hyperbole, the archaeology backs it up. Settlement patterns in the Balkans show dramatic depopulation in this exact period. The Eastern Emperor Theodosius II was forced into a humiliating peace treaty in 443 AD. The terms, a massive annual tribute of 700 pounds of gold. Roman military prisoners returned to Attila. And here is the detail that tells you everything about Attila's psychology. Any Roman prisoner who had escaped from the Huns and made it back to Roman territory had to be returned to Attila. Alive. What happened to those men when they were returned? Priscus tells us that Attila had them impaled. Publicly. As a message. Not because they had done something uniquely terrible. Because they had escaped. Because leaving without permission was the offense. Because Attila needed Rome to understand that his reach extended even inside their own borders. Theodosius paid. For years. Then in 447, Attila came back. Demanded more. Got a new treaty, even more humiliating than the last. 2,100 pounds of gold per year. Plus backdated payments. Plus Rome handing over land south of the Danube as a buffer zone. The Eastern Empire, at its height the richest state in the world, was paying a man on the Hungarian plains to leave them alone. And Attila was deciding whether to honor that arrangement on any given morning, based entirely on his mood. The moment that triggered Attila's invasion of the Western Roman Empire, the campaign that brought him to the gates of Rome itself, was one of the strangest diplomatic incidents in ancient history. Honoria was the sister of Western Emperor Valentinian III. She was intelligent, politically aware, and absolutely furious. Her brother had caught her in a secret relationship with her estate manager, a man named Eugenius, and had him executed. Then he arranged to have Honoria married off to a dull, safe, politically harmless senator to keep her out of trouble. Honoria had other plans. She smuggled a letter and a ring to Attila. The letter asked for his help. The ring, in ancient custom, could be interpreted as an offer of betrothal. Attila chose to interpret it exactly that way. He sent word to Valentinian, "Send Honoria to me as my bride, and with her, send half of the Western Empire as her dowry." Valentinian's response was essentially, "Absolutely not. She's already engaged, and she's been exiled for this outrage." Attila's response, "Then I'll come take what's mine." In 451 AD, he assembled the largest army that had moved through Europe since the Mongol invasions, hundreds of thousands of warriors from dozens of subject peoples. Huns, Ostrogoths, Gepids, Rugians, Syrians, Herulians. A multi-ethnic war machine with Attila at the center. He crossed the Rhine in the dead of winter and began destroying Gaul city by city. Metz, Reims, Cologne, Trier, Strasbourg. Each city either submitted or burned. The sources describe streets running with blood. Survivors, the ones lucky enough to be taken alive, marched east as slaves or ransomed back to their families at whatever price Attila named. There is a story, almost certainly legendary, but recorded in multiple sources, that when Attila's forces approached the city of Orleans, Bishop Aenianus told the people to pray and to watch the city walls. At the exact moment when the Hunnic forces were about to breach the gates, a Roman army appeared on the horizon. The city was saved. That army was commanded by Flavius Aetius, the Roman boy who had once been a hostage among the Huns, who had learned to ride and fight with them, who had for years used Hunnic mercenaries to win his own political battles inside Rome. Aetius and Attila, two men shaped by the same world, now on opposite sides of a catastrophic war. In June of 451 AD, somewhere on the plains of what is now northeastern France, the two largest armies assembled in the Western world collided. On one side, Attila and his Hunnic coalition. On the other, Aetius commanding a combined force of Romans, Visigoths, Burgundians, and Frankish allies. The Battle of the Catalonian Plains, also called the Battle of Chalons, is described by ancient sources in terms that border on apocalyptic. Jordanes wrote that 165,000 men died in the battle. Modern historians consider that a massive exaggeration, but even conservative estimates suggest tens of thousands killed in a single day. The Visigothic king Theodoric I was killed in the fighting, trampled by his own cavalry in the chaos. His son Thorismund fought on after finding his father's body, driven by grief into a ferocity that broke Attila's center. Attila retreated to a wagon fort, a defensive circle of supply wagons, and prepared to die there. He reportedly had his saddle and treasures piled into a funeral pyre, ready to ride into the flames rather than be captured. Then Aetius made a decision that history has never fully explained. He let Attila go. He persuaded the Visigothic forces to withdraw, partly by arguing that a Visigothic victory over Attila would make the Visigoths too powerful inside Roman territory. And Attila, surrounded and broken, simply left. He crossed back over the Rhine. He regrouped. He rested. And in 452 he invaded Italy. So no, the Battle of the Catalonian Plains was not the defeat of Attila. It was a tactical setback. And the year that followed was arguably worse than anything that had come before. In the spring of 452 AD, Attila crossed the Alps into Italy. He had no army waiting to stop him. Valentinian had fled Rome. The city's defenses were inadequate. The empire was effectively defenseless. Aquileia was one of the most important cities in northern Italy, a major port, a commercial hub, one of the largest cities in the entire Western Roman world. Attila laid siege to it. The siege lasted 3 months. The defenders held. Attila's commanders reportedly urged him to abandon it and move on. Then, according to Jordans, Attila noticed storks leaving the city, flying their young out over the walls. He interpreted this as a sign that the city was about to fall. He ordered a final assault. Aquileia fell. And what Attila did next defined how Rome remembered him forever. He didn't occupy the city. He didn't garrison it. He didn't tax it or use it as a base. He destroyed it so completely that it essentially ceased to exist. The population that wasn't killed was enslaved and marched east. The buildings were torn down. The archaeological record shows a complete settlement discontinuity. Aquileia as a functioning city simply ends in 452 AD. The people who fled Aquileia went into the lagoon islands offshore. They built shelters on the mud. Those shelters became the city of Venice. Think about that. Venice exists because Attila destroyed Aquileia so thoroughly that the survivors decided to live on mud rather than go back. From Aquileia, Attila moved down through northern Italy. Padua, Verona, Vicenza, Brescia, Bergamo, Milan. Each city fell or paid enormous ransoms. Attila reportedly had a painter create a portrait of himself on a throne, with Roman emperors humbled before him, pouring tribute at his feet. He sent this painting to cities that hadn't yet surrendered as a preview of what was coming. Milan Mediolanum was sacked. The imperial palace there was occupied by Attila. He reportedly sat in the emperor's throne and had himself served by imperial servants. Rome itself was undefended. Nothing stood between Attila and the Eternal City. And then came Pope Leo. In a meeting near the Mincio River, Leo I went out personally to negotiate with Attila. We don't know what was said. The sources tell us only that Attila agreed to leave Italy, taking his army, his prisoners, and his tribute, but going. Later Christian writers said it was divine intervention, that Saints Peter and Paul appeared behind Leo, threatening Attila with celestial swords. Attila's own men reportedly saw figures in the sky. The more grounded explanation is that Attila's army was suffering from plague, that supply lines were stretched, that a relief army was finally forming in the east, and that Leo brought a substantial payment of gold. But even the practical explanation leaves something unexplained. Attila had Rome within reach. He chose to leave. Some historians argue he was saving Rome for a second invasion, that he planned to come back and finish the conquest properly. If so, he never got the chance. In 453 AD, Attila died. Not in battle, not executed by enemies, not poisoned by a rival king. He died on his wedding night. He had taken a new wife, a young woman named Ildico. The feast celebrating the marriage was reportedly one of the grandest celebrations his court had ever seen. Attila drank heavily. He retired to his chamber with his new bride. In the morning, when his commanders came to check on him, he didn't emerge. They broke down the door. Attila lay dead. Ildico was sitting beside him, weeping, her face covered with her veil. There was blood. Massive internal hemorrhage, likely a burst blood vessel, probably caused by heavy drinking combined with the exertion of the night. The man who had made the Roman Empire beg, who had burned 17 cities, who had driven populations into swamps to escape him, who had marched an army through the Alps and down through Italy and turned back from Rome itself. He died in bed, alone with a woman who had every reason to hate him. Was it an accident? Natural causes from a lifetime of heavy drinking? Or was it Ildico? The ancient sources don't accuse her, but they don't exonerate her either. They simply record what was found. The historians have debated it ever since. His body was placed in 3 nested coffins, 1 iron, 1 silver, 1 gold. His burial party killed everyone who helped dig the grave, so the location could never be found. To this day, no one knows where Attila the Hun is buried. His empire, which had no stable succession mechanism, collapsed almost immediately. His sons divided the territory and fought each other. Within a generation, the Hunnic Empire was gone. But Rome never recovered either. The damage Attila had done to the Western Roman Empire's finances, population, and military was irreversible. 23 years after Attila's death, the Western Roman Empire officially ended. Hollywood has given us Attila as a barbaric savage, a man driven by bloodlust and nothing more. And every time they do that, they miss the point completely. The real Attila was more dangerous than any movie villain because he was rational, deliberate, strategic. He destroyed cities not because he enjoyed it, though he may have, but because total destruction sent a message that a sacking never could. A sacked city could recover. A city turned to bone-scattered rubble could not. And the survivors who fled that rubble carried Attila's message to the next city. There is no point in resisting. He weaponized fear as effectively as any military force. His intelligence network, his psychological warfare, his understanding of Roman political weakness, these made him more dangerous than any amount of cavalry. He had been inside the Roman world. He knew its corruption. He knew its internal divisions. He knew that the Western and Eastern empires hated each other almost as much as they hated him. He played them against each other constantly, threatening the East to get payments while threatening the West, then switching. The Attila that Hollywood gives you is manageable. He's a monster with a face, a sword, and a backstory. You can understand him. You can root against him. The real Attila is more unsettling because he understood power at a level that most modern people, watching from behind a screen, will never have to confront. He came closer to ending Western civilization than any enemy Rome had ever faced. And he did it not with supernatural power, but with intelligence, brutality, and the willingness to do what his enemies couldn't bring themselves to do. The Scourge of God. That's what his contemporaries called him. Not a title he gave himself. A title Rome gave him because they needed a frame for something they couldn't fully explain. The frame made him smaller than he was. It still does. Attila the Hun died in 453 AD. The Roman Empire he had spent his life tearing apart survived him by only 23 years. The cities he burned took centuries to recover. Some never did. If this video gave you something you didn't know before, something they left out of the history books, hit subscribe to re-invoke history. Because every week, we go back into the records, the eyewitness accounts, the sources the mainstream version of history glosses over. Because the real story is always stranger, always darker, and always more interesting than what they taught you. The next video, you're not going to believe what actually happened.